This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of April 17th, 2023. And this week we're talking about DirecTV's Gemini. And why wouldn't we? This is the first new residential hardware for DirecTV since the end of 2017, and it's their first new client box since 2015. I mean, come on, that's an eternity when you think about it. And there's a lot of excitement around this Gemini box. So let's get a couple of things out of the way first. What is Gemini? Gemini is a client box for your DirecTV system, which means you need a Genie DVR to use it. You can't just use it with a regular receiver. But unlike other client boxes, which have been around for about 10 years, this one also acts as a streaming box. So in other words, you can be watching DirecTV, push one button, and get straight to all of your apps. You don't have to change inputs on your TV. You don't have to pick up a different remote. It's a lot more convenient. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is the first time that anyone has ever done this sort of thing. I know that there are other paid TV providers that do this. In fact, Solid Signal is a Dish Premier retailer, and Dish's Hopper Plus provides a lot of the same functionality. And it's not that DirecTV is really late to the party. They're just kind of on time. They're not ahead of the game, which is a little bit different perspective considering their history of being sort of a disruptor in that market. The Gemini is literally a whole new generation of box. And before I really explain what makes it different, I want to explain how it came to be. And it's really a saucy story if you think about it. Now, we all know that AT&T bought DirecTV in 2015, and I personally was really optimistic about it. I thought there was going to be a lot of synergy. I thought it was going to work out really well for everybody. But it turns out that the naysayers were right. Really, what AT&T wanted was DirecTV's Sunday ticket contract, the football thing. And they didn't care about the satellite thing. Matter of fact, they started making a lot of moves pretty early on to say, well, we're just going to let the satellite thing die on the vine. We're not going to move it forward, but if people want to keep going with it, fine. And so they stopped developing new hardware. They already had one box that was kind of in the pipeline, was too late to cancel, and that's the Genie 2, which came out in 2017. But as for the rest of the things that were or were not on the roadmap, people were just thinking about it. Well, they just kind of canceled them. And they laid off a lot of people who were involved in those new projects. A lot of people who are friends of mine, as a matter of fact. Well, this really, in my opinion, was the right move. And I don't think it was the right move in the marketplace either, because DirecTV started losing customers. And their streaming system, which was at one point called DirecTV Now, and later on it was called AT&T TV Now, and then just AT&T TV, it never took off for them during the AT&T tenure. So the gains there were not offsetting the losses in satellite. It's just kind of what I'm trying to say. As a result, AT&T spun off DirecTV in 2022. They're still the majority owner, but they don't really operate it. It's got its own balance sheet, it's got its own management, and it's got its own priorities. Well, as soon as this happened, the folks at DirecTV started moving as fast as they possibly could to try to get some new hardware in the pipeline. The first thing they did was take a relatively unused device, the DirecTV H44 receiver, and repurpose it so that commercial customers could use it. This is important because commercial customers were using H25 receivers. The last one was made in 2011. So you can imagine that there were a lot of them that just were DOA when they came out onto the customer site. Adding the H44 really made a difference, and it made a fast one. So then they turned to residential, and they wanted to do something similar. AT&T had a streaming box of their own, which ran the AT&T service, which was later renamed again to DirecTV Stream. And they said, well, okay, how can we take this and turn it into a DirecTV client box? Instead of running the AT&T Stream DirecTV Now app, how about having it run a client box app? Well, it wasn't as simple as all of that. Now, why? Because yes, it's true that the client boxes themselves are very simple Linux devices, and that the streaming box is based on Android, and Android is not that different from Linux, but there was a lot of work to do. It all had to be looked at. Every single bit of it had to be scrutinized and changed to make sure that it worked and recoded. And what they did was they came up with a really incredible way to make it look like you are using a regular DirecTV client, like nothing has changed. And wow, did they make that happen. The thing that impresses me the most about this box is that really, if you're a regular DirecTV customer, you're going to hardly notice that things have changed unless you really want them to. Before I dig further into that, I want to kind of answer the question you might have been thinking while I was telling that story. Well, why does it take so long for new hardware to come out? Well, of course, it has to be prototyped, it has to be designed, it has to be tested, it has to be programmed, and then it has to go through the FCC. Because the FCC is such a dysfunctional entity at the top, it still doesn't have the full complement of 5 commissioners that it needed. Well, things are very slow. And it could have taken years for new hardware to make it through. And that's the last thing that DirecTV needed at that point. Now let's talk about what is new on the DirecTV Gemini box. Like I said, it acts like a client box. You can even use your old remote if you like it. But it also acts like a streaming box. There's a new remote with a button that says apps on it and a streamlined interface there. They took out a few buttons that made no sense. Like the old DirecTV remote had both a red button and a record button, which led to a lot of confusion. So they just combined that all with one red button. And right in the middle of it, there's a voice control button. And this is all Google Voice Assistant. If you have this on your phone, then you know it's pretty good. And that means this is a voice-capable remote, which a lot of people have been asking for from DirecTV for a long time because some of the competitors have had it. So you got a voice-capable remote. It pairs via Bluetooth, which makes it very reliable. Also gives it really, really great range. You don't have to point it at the box if you don't want to. It feels really good in the hand. It's nice and light. It's got a kind of a soft touch feeling. But, kind of geeking out about the remote isn't the point. After all, nobody stares at the remote. They want to watch television, right? That's kind of the whole point. And once you get into watching TV this way, you're not going to want to do it a different way if you're a DirecTV customer. It's so easy to switch from live TV to apps. It's the same familiar menu system that you're used to. And then it bops right into a streaming box experience, which if you've got another Android TV or a smart TV or even a Roku or Apple TV, this is going to look very familiar to you. It's also real similar to the Fire Stick. It uses the Google Play Store, which you might have on your phone. It's just, one of those things kind of just works. It all clicks, it all makes sense, and it all performs really well. I've got a variety of streaming boxes myself, and some of them are super fast, and some of them are, well, let's say not. Performance on this box was really excellent. I was very pleased with that because I was a little worried. When you've got one of these things that tries to do everything, usually what happens is it doesn't do anything terribly well. This isn't like that. I give the folks at DirecTV high marks for getting something out on the marketplace as fast as they possibly could. I mean, keep in mind, they've only been an independent entity for less than a year, and they got this thing out to market in record time. I have to imagine that this is the beginning of a whole new generation of hardware for them, and the future hardware will be more tightly integrated into the DirecTV ecosystem. And that's a good thing too. I could also imagine, because this is such an easy box to update compared to the older client boxes, after all, it's just kind of running an app, that they could have a new user interface if they wanted to do that. They opted not to. They opted to use the same user interface they've had for the last 6 years because people seem to like it. They didn't initially, but they've really grown to love it. Now there's one more thing that I really want to tell you about this box, and it's going to sound like a sales job, and well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. When you're looking at this box, it's very confusing. I know that there's a method to DirecTV's madness in there somewhere, but I sure don't understand it. There are 2 identical looking boxes, and that is because, like I said, they repurposed one to make the other. But they've decided to call them both DirecTV Gemini. One they call DirecTV Gemini for satellite and internet. One they call DirecTV Gemini for internet. And one uses the DirecTV streaming service, which used to be called DirecTV Stream, and before that it was called a lot of other things. And one uses the DirecTV satellite service. Well, if you get the wrong box, it's going to be very hard to return it and get the right box. You can't convert one box into another, which I honestly am not quite sure why, because it seems to me that they could probably do that fairly easily, but they don't allow that. So before you go out looking for your Gemini, don't go to directtv.com, because honestly, I don't want to kind of dunk on them, but I've read a lot of their support pages and they're not always the way that I would answer those questions. But don't go to directtv.com. Certainly do not go to eBay or Amazon and buy used hardware, because it will look like the right thing and it won't be the right thing. You want to go to Solid Signal, because we've spent a lot of time internally training on this box and helping customers know which direction to go. It's really critical that you get this right the first time, because it could be a huge mess if you pick the wrong one. So give the folks at Solid Signal a call. You'll be glad you did. Call 888-233-7563. It's worth the time. It's worth the effort. You can also go to solidsignal.com and you can chat if you want to get it all done that way. There are people who do like extremely large deals on solidsignal.com over chat, which always amazes me. Completely up to you. Check us out. We will do our best to take care of you. Anyway, that's about it for the Solid Signal podcast for this week. Do me a favor, like and subscribe. It makes me look good to my boss. Leave a comment anywhere fine comments are sold. And if you're interested in new topics for the Solid Signal podcast, always leave those as well. I am very grateful, of course, to all of you for listening, making it all the way through this podcast, and I will see you again next week.